Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Business Mastery Podcast. So today we're going to be talking about assessing your own business, what that should look like, maybe how often you should do it. And I've got Jen on here who's going to walk us through all the things, and let's talk about business assessments you do yourself. Thank you, Jen, so much for joining me today.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
So, Jen Cochrane, I am the CEO of Gifted Travel Network. We are a B2B business, and so our clients are travel agencies, independent travel agency owners, and we provide coaching and education and all the things to have them help have successful businesses, as well as we have access to like all of the super elite programs that benefit their clients that they can't get other ways. So, but holistically, our mission, our passion is empowering success through travel entrepreneurship. And so we help lots of travel entrepreneurs create really vibrant and lucrative travel businesses.
Great. I love that. So we designed this episode and really wanted to talk about businesses self-assessing. And as a coach of people who have other businesses, you have a process that you walk people through to get to a place where they can actually do some creative problem solving, right? So sometimes we look at something and it's too narrow. We try to solve that one thing. It's like whack-a-mole, right? So you solve one and another one pops up. So let's talk about, how do we conduct this, assessment, especially looking at ourselves? I think sometimes that can be tough to do.
It can be tough to do. And it also is really hard to do when you're like in the middle of the day-to-day and you're on the hamster wheel and you're kind of doing all of the things. And like you said, we tend to just tackle things as they come up, or as the need becomes apparent, then we do something about that one specific thing. But we don't often give ourselves the gift of really taking a step back and taking a holistic look at our business. I mean, we do it when we initially start our businesses, right? And we do business plans and we systematically go through all the things, and then we put it on a shelf, so to speak, and don't really go through that sort of, robust process again. And really, we should be taking time to do some sort of like strategic planning for our businesses. I recommend doing it once a quarter and doing like a really holistic review once a year. And it doesn't matter what size your business is, whether you're a one-person business or you've got a team of 100, you need to kind of take a step back and do that process, in my opinion, because there's always the risk of losing the forest through the trees, but also when we aren't really clear on what our priorities are and we aren't really clear on, the goals that we have for ourselves, then we tend to, go after shiny objects, we get distracted. We might make business decisions that independently make sense. But if you look at it in like the overall priority of all the things that you should be focusing on for your business in the next 12 months, maybe that one was number 12 and not number 1. And you don't know that unless you've taken the top-down approach. So what I recommend is, first of all, get yourself out of the day-to-day craziness, which means actually calendar time for yourself. And I mean, we work with travel advisors, who often, appreciate like a luxury hotel, for example. We're like, book yourself somewhere, get away from your business, take a little mini, offsite for yourself. And then get in so that you can be inspired and you can be in a place where you don't have your notifications going off. If you're in a physical office, you don't have people knocking on your door, whatever the situation is. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing is that, to me, it's really important that you start at the top with the big picture. So it might seem obvious that like we know our vision and we know our passion. I mean, of course we do, but if you want to come from an inspired place, it's really important to be very tapped into that. So I always recommend actually starting by re-articulating what that vision really looks like, what that mission is, so that you're in that headspace. And sometimes I find when people are going through that exercise that they might realize that there's some sort of amplification or some aspect of their business that vision is expanded in some way or slightly shifted in some way. Sometimes it's narrowed in some way. Sometimes they've realized they want to be more specialized in a given area. So it's important to to look at that and say, what is, is this vision, the business I love that's supporting the life that I love, and do I want to continue in exactly the path that I'm on?
Yeah, that's so important. I have to ask, working with as many businesses that, industry is travel, how many times do you see people that they started with one specific vision and then let's say 18 months later, they haven't really looked at it again. They're busy, they're working, they're in the day-to-day. What percentage of the time do you see people actually shifting? I would probably imagine it's pretty often.
Yeah, people definitely do. And it's also the phases of the business. And, and as your business grows, you also have the luxury of being a little bit more picky about who you serve as well. And you get more clear on what you really love to do. So with travel advisors in particular, they tend to narrow more over time. And they tend to also really refine their client base, because it's not just about what's lucrative, it's also about what's fulfilling. And they might find over time that, whether it's lucrative or not, of doing this kind of travel experience. Other people might love doing that one, but they don't. And so they start to refine their business and really focus on the things that they love the most.
All right, awesome. So step one, take a look again at that big picture, the vision, and make sure it's still in alignment and that you haven't maybe tweaked it much since you last look at it. And again, is this for the annual plan or do you do this quarterly as well?
I think it's the annual plan at that level, but I think it's a good idea to just kind of read back through it and kind of get in that space, even when you're going into a quarterly planning process. It depends on the person to some extent, but definitely you want to do like the very big picture, at least annually.
Okay, perfect. All right. So then what's the next step when we've looked at the vision? We go, yep, we're still there, or yep, we're going to tweak it a little bit. Then what do we do?
So then the next part of it is sort of a little bit more narrow, but related to the overall vision, which is really looking at your target audience and understanding your ideal client. And so do you have a good articulation? Do you have a good view of who that ideal client is? Have you sort of built an avatar around that ideal client? Do you know where they hang out, what kinds of brands they like? Are you very clear on the one or several, profiles that your target audience is and what their pain points are and what sort of solution you're trying to provide to them? And related to that, then, is your messaging very clear? I provide X to Y so that Z, your value proposition, is your value proposition clear for your ideal client? I think is the next piece. And again, that may not change over time, but it's always a good idea. I mean, as businesses evolve, I think it does tend to change. It may not have changed since the last time you did your annual plan, but I think it's really important to look at that, because the step after that is the marketing plan. And you can't have a really good targeted marketing plan if you aren't super clear on your ideal clients, because you're going to end up either with inquiries that don't match what you offer, and attracting the wrong people, or just not maximizing your marketing spend.
Yeah. And I think it's, if you look at that again annually, but if you're going to spend and do those things even quarterly, it's probably good to check in on that. Businesses do evolve, right? The customer often evolves with the business. And if you had a particular thing in mind and ran some campaigns over a quarter and you didn't get the results, it may be this kind of evolution and growth of the type of client you serve or the thing that you serve with. And that could be the first time you even see that there's a mismatch.
Right. And also the human psyche evolves, like how you marketed travel pre-pandemic and how you market travel immediately post-pandemic, for example. It's different. People's pain points are different. That the reason that they wanted to get out and see the world slightly evolves, So your messaging both has to do with your brand, like, are you the person who's, who really wants to fulfill the traveler's desire, who wants to be totally in cultural immersion, then obviously your messaging and your ideal client is going to be people who appreciate that kind of travel, and your messaging is going to want to elicit that sort of behavior from people. So I think it's both looking at sort of the people, but also looking at who that ideal client is and what they're caring about at that moment in time, and whether you're speaking to what it is that they need.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, and I've talked about this briefly in other episodes, was, for probably the last 18 months or so, a lot of the larger companies were doing commercials on value rather than experience. I have a coffee company, right? So Coffee Mate, instead of saying the experience of that French vanilla, it actually became, you can make so many coffee house style coffees at home. So being tuned into that means that you also won't be messaging against people spending 25 times your budget.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Or something that's sort of tone deaf for whatever is going on in the current time.
Yeah. That could probably break reputation if you come out that little tone deaf. Okay. All right. So you said the marketing plan is next.
So then the marketing plan is next. What do you get really clear on that? Then it's like, well, how are you reaching those ideal clients? Assuming that you want to build your business maybe through acquiring new clients, but also there's the aspect of acquiring new clients, and then there's an aspect of keeping the clients that you already have. So I kind of think of it as the two main marketing activities. You've got your list building activities where you're going out and getting in front of potentially new business. And then you've got your engagement activities of how you're keeping that relationship warm over time and those clients engaged. And so I feel like this is something you definitely need to do on a quarterly basis, is look at what your list building strategies are and your engagement strategies are and how well they're working, and create some goals on that you want to build your business, or how much, maybe you want to do more in terms of getting referrals through keeping your existing clients more engaged. Depends on the business. But to create some goals around, do I need to do more of this or do I need to do more of that? And then actually have a plan around it. So if you want to build your business, what are those list building activities are you doing? So in the world of travel, that might be, are you going to an event where you're getting people, in person and getting names and email addresses that then you can add to your newsletter list? Or are you doing any kind of social media marketing, where there's some sort of, you're giving out information or an opt-in or something where you're building your list through that activity? There's going to be some similarities across businesses and some things that are industry specific, but most businesses that are in a growth mode are going to have some sort of list building activity. So be very clear on what those activities are, what the timing of the activities are, and what your goals are, how much you want to grow the list by. And then on the engagement side, some of that's a little bit more subjective, but you can also be looking at like sort of what are your open rates? What are your referrals looking like? What's a percentage of referrals, return customers? And is there more that you need to do on the engagement side, to make your clients really feel like they belong to you?
Yeah, I really like that. A lot of times when people talk about my quarterly goal, I think a large part of the time it is new customer acquisition. I don't know that we talk enough about those customer retention marketing goals. And so, so in your plan, you're saying you do need to have a goal for both. You have to have a way to reach both, specific tasks outlined on both sides. And I think it's important to be aware that both sides have to, I guess, exist at the same time in your quarter.
Yeah. And it's actually a really good time of year to be thinking about the retention piece of it and strategies around the retention piece, because, with the holidays coming up, and particularly Thanksgiving, I'm talking about, is a really good opportunity to do some sort of keep in touch campaign with your clients, send them a note of thanks, some sort of appreciation, something to remind them, that you appreciate them and that you're thinking about them.
I love that. Okay, so we're going to look at the marketing goals and we're going to put some specific tasks to that. What's next?
Okay, so the next is the operational plan. And in that, you want to sort of look at your business processes in a systematic way. And in the travel business, we usually do that by looking at the whole sales cycle from, the inquiry coming in, to presenting a proposal, to accepting a deposit on a trip, to following through and doing all the things to get the person ready for the trip, to when they travel, to when they return from travel, until you're marketing to them again. And, every business is going to have its own, whatever that cycle looks like, whatever that client care cycle looks like. But during the operational plan, the idea is that you're going through that and you're looking at all your business processes and you're saying, are they efficient? Are there new tools that I could be implementing? Are they consistent enough? Because excellence has a lot to do with consistency. Am I doing things manually, or am I missing steps? Do I have enough ticklers in place? Do I have, all the right things to make sure that the excellence of service that I'm providing is going to be repeatable, consistent, and efficiently done, is essentially what you're trying to do there. And so that might extend to tools, it might extend to processes, and it also might extend to staffing. Am I at a point where I am not at my highest and best use? Because, we all know as business owners, right, that just because you can do everything doesn't mean you should. Right. And if we are spending our time doing things like data entry, we are certainly not spending that time strategically growing our business. We should be hiring somebody to do the data entry so that we are in our highest and best use. And I have always sort of coached people to hire ahead of growth. So if you're expecting, you're planning for growth in your business, you don't want to be bringing somebody on board and training them when you're at the peak and you're at over capacity already. You want to bring them in before you get to that point, so they're fully up and ready to continue to fuel that growth. Because if we don't continue to expand the capabilities and capacity, then we are putting an absolute cap on the growth of our business. The only way that we can continue to grow is continue to add capacity. And so that's where you want to evaluate that as well. Am I at a point where I need, and whether it's through outsourcing some aspect of the business or bringing in additional staffing, there's many ways to do it depending on what your business is, but really taking a good look at am I at or nearing capacity, or am I doing things that are not my highest and best use and really be done by somebody else, so that when I am doing my highest and best use, my business is going to grow just by virtue of the fact that I'm focused on the right things and not the day-to-day heavy lifting stuff.
Right. I actually really love this because your assessment strategy is to come from the client's perspective first. Instead of, so many people, and I'm guilty of this, will dive into the financials or will dive into operations from our perspective, right? So how are we doing things? And what you're saying is, but how is the customer being taken care of through your operational flow? So it really kind of flips that around a little bit, that the business perspective is outside of your perspective in the business and actually from the people doing business with you. I think that's interesting. And I think what I also like is I really think that gives you an opportunity to see the gaps from their perspective that may exist, or the gaps that may be coming up, like you said, bottlenecks and stuff, from where the client might start to feel it before you do.
Right. And, so there may be risks that you want to mitigate of dropping the ball type risks because you don't have the process in place or you're under capacity. But then there's also, the excellence of care, what you're talking about, coming at it from the client's perspective. And there's a little bit of overlap here with your engagement strategies, because are there places in the process where you're serving that client that you can add that little extra touch, or you can add that additional personalization, or you can add, giving them even more information or whatever it is that they value to make that client really sticky and to make sure that you're getting referrals at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So to recap, we're going to start from that vision, looking at ourselves to see if we're still in alignment. We're going to then look at the marketing plan and specifically get goals for new clients and client acquisition. Then we're going to look at the ops, but we're looking at it from the client's perspective so that we can look and see, like you said, whether or not there might be, some gaps coming up or some capacity issues that the clients would probably feel before we do. All right, what's next?
So one of the things that I didn't mention, but it's worth mentioning, is the part where you're going through your ideal client and your messaging and making sure the articulation of your value proposition is still on target and correct and everything, is the aesthetic representation of that. And so that's also an opportunity to take a good look at your branding, because that's another thing that, you're not changing it every quarter for sure, and probably not every year, but branding needs to be refreshed on a fairly regular basis. And you want to make sure that it's consistently applied across all of your marketing assets, that it still is aligned with your message and who you are as a company, the colors, the fonts. That is an important part there.
Yeah.
So it's the vision, the messaging, the ideal client, the messaging, which is also the branding. And then the marketing plan, your list building, your engagement strategies, and then your operational plan. Are you keeping up with your capacity constraints? And also, do you have an efficient, effective process that's going to keep you running smoothly, that's going to have you in your highest and best use, and that's going to make sure that your client care is optimal and excellent consistently across the board for your client? And then When I get into the financial pieces sort of at the end, after you've gone through all of that, because as you've gone through this systematically, you've come up with some things that you want to do in your marketing plan. There's some marketing investments that you probably want to make to actually implement the list building activities that you've put in your plan. Or maybe there's some rebranding you want to invest in, or maybe it's a new piece of technology that you discovered when you're doing your operational plan, and you want to make sure that you've considered all of those in your budget. And so there's several sort of phases that I think about in the operational plan or sort of different types of financial planning. So an obvious one is the budget. And so usually what I recommend people do when they're initially starting out is to take a look at what they spent in the prior period, line by line. What did you spend on advertising? What did you spend on, your phone bill? What did you spend on personnel? What did you spend on, itemize all that out. Look at historically what your run rate looks like. And then take into account those things that you just came up with in your plan and budget for those as well, and it may go up or down. If you did a big rebrand last year, you obviously don't need to budget for a rebrand this coming year. But, what does it actually look like projecting forward in terms of your expected expenses? And then, your compensation has to be in there as well. So if you pay yourself a salary and your employees' salaries, obviously you want to include your salary expense. But also if you're the business owner and you're also sort of compensating yourself through shareholder distributions, what you want to do is take your total expenses plus what you want to have out of the business. And then you want to make sure that your revenue that you're projecting is going to be higher, right? So that you've still got a profitable business. So after you do the expense projections, I usually lead with the expense projections and then go and do some revenue projections for yourself. And again, you got to start with your run rate and look at what your revenue has been. And then you have to do your best guess across your various revenue categories if you have different revenue drivers to look at what you feel is likely for the upcoming period. And obviously, if you're falling short in covering all those expenses, then you might have to make some adjustments in your prioritization for what you put into your plan, and that's obviously more of an art than it is a science. But at the end of the day, you need to know that over the course of the year, your revenue is going to exceed your expenses. Or if you know that it's not and you're more in startup mode or you're in reinvestment mode or build mode, then you need to know what your investment needs to be in order to keep the business cash flow positive and viable for the upcoming period.
Yeah, that's so important. And I love how you did the expenses first and then the revenue. I think a lot of times if you hear other businesses, they kind of do it backwards. They're like, project your revenue and then invest into it, which I think it just makes a heck of a lot more sense to let's take a look at the expenses. Because I think also that if you want to make this number of strategic investments, and you have an annual plan and you have a business that maybe has some seasonal dips and valleys, right? Then you can literally do a quick kind of ROI assessment. I guess this gets now into that creative problem solving. And you can decide, well, maybe that's better for second quarter or third quarter. Right. And I love that. So your financial assessment of the business then is really to start from all of the expenses, all of the investments, your compensation, any draws, and you get that number. Now, I have to ask, how many times have people been a little bit put off by that number when they really do this honestly?
I think less than they were afraid that they were going to be. I tend to find that people haven't done it out of fear. And once they do it, it's more empowering because it's a lot less scary than they thought.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I help them with is, so there's a practical sort of budget analysis. And then there's a different exercise, which I think of as scenario analysis. And so in the travel business, for example, we have various revenue drivers that are going to get you to what your revenue for your business is. And the levels of those things are going to impact your revenue. So in the travel business, there's the size of your sale, the yield on your sale, certain factors. And so I actually kind of built a revenue driver formula to help them do scenario analysis where they can kind of plug in, if I have this many inquiries and I'm converting at this rate, this makes this much in sales. And if my yield is this and my average transaction size is that, and I'm charging this much in service fees, this is what my revenue looks like at the end of the day. And I would recommend that everybody sort of builds their own little sort of calculator or scenario analysis tool so that they can say, well, if my sales were just, 10% larger, what would that do to my bottom line? If I just had this much more in my profit margin, what would that do to my bottom line? Because it's a lot harder to sort of have a big revenue goal than it is to have smaller targets that you can measure more easily of the inputs to that revenue goal. And it also really opens up the possibility, because you might think like, well, my business is, I can't think about my business making this much money. But then you play around with the numbers and you're like, actually, if I just did a little bit this and I just did a little bit of that, look at what happens to my bottom line. It's a big difference, because a big number just looks like a big number. But if you look at like what makes up that big number, it's like, actually, that's totally doable.
Right. And this also, I think, would come back to, I'm going to call it creative problem solving. I'm sure there's, like you said, there's an art and a science to a lot of this. That would also force you to maybe look at your pricing. If you're not somebody who looks regularly at your pricing, having this sort of tool, and if you do your expenses first, especially if you're in a product business and your cost of goods has gone up, but you haven't really been paying attention.
Right.
You put this tool together and you're like, wait a second, I have these 2 things that are maybe really sort of losing money at the end of the day, and these 5 that are doing better. And you can be very strategic in looking at your pricing and making adjustments. So not just like your number of sales. I hear this quite a bit where people are like, I just need to sell more. It's like, but do you? Do you just need to sell more?
Yeah. And sometimes it's actually, you need to sell less. You just need to make more money on what you're selling, or you need to just sell this thing and forget about these other things, that because you're using a lot of bandwidth on these other things, and the biggest bang for your buck is with this bigger ticket items. So get rid of the little stuff and just do the big stuff.
Yeah. So all of this assessment here, actually, I think if you're super honest doing this in your business, at least quarterly for a plan and then annually for the setting it up and figuring out which quarter you want to do what, really sets you up to be able to kind of do that whack-a-mole or answer those things that come up from the day-to-day. But I mean, if somebody sits down and they go, wow, we really don't need to be doing, let's say, these 2 things anymore based on this data and this, real hard look at the business. The first goal of sitting down and doing this, I think, is just to admit it needs to be done consistently. And I think you're giving a whole lot of reasons why people should take themselves away and do this. Because, could you imagine sitting down and realizing your bottom line is going to go up if you stop doing 2 things?
Right. Exactly. It's so empowering to be able to do that. And then on at least a quarterly basis, and I think for most businesses, you really want to do it on a monthly basis. You actually want to go back to that budget, and you want to look at your actuals, and you want to see on both the revenue and the expense side, are you tracking to what you put down as your expectations? Because you need to make adjustments over time if you're not, plus or minus, and that's sort of the more tactical part. But I think it's easier to be good at the tactical part if you've done a good job on the big picture first and understanding it. And on the scenario analysis, it's not like you have to, be a sophisticated model or something like that. A simple Excel spreadsheet, you just build some sort of formulas in there, and then, and have some fields where you can plug in new data and everything kind of recalculates. It's not that hard to do. Most people with sort of basic Excel skills can do that. But if that's not a skill you have, that's certainly something that you could ask, somebody to help out with, get an external person to build something like that for you.
Yeah, definitely. And if you've been in business for any length of time, I think you pretty much start to learn what the variables are that move, those numbers either way.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're not somebody who's used to doing this, I would suggest you get someone to help you and, help you maybe take a good look at your business the first time. If you are struggling to see specifically those things that are moving the needle or not moving the needle. So, let's just say that we've done our annual plan. We've identified 4 big projects for the next fiscal year. We've dug into our financials. We've realized that a particular project would be better in a different quarter. We've set all this up. We put all this aside. Let's talk about really implementation, right? So you build your project plan, you do it in Asana on Monday, whatever it is, and you start to put the things in play, and something happens. what do you do as far as like the flexibility of the plan and going back? Or are you a person who's like, you just solve the little problems and you just kind of push through it? Because I've had some experience with people who are like, just stick to the plan. It'll all work out. Stick to the plan. And then I've had others who say, hey, if the data changes, you change the plan.
Yeah, I think I'm more in the second camp.
Okay.
Because I mean, that's part of we do as entrepreneurs, right? I mean, you sort of, a lot of it's a leap of faith. You have to use a lot of intuition. You have to, so there's the discipline of doing the plan. It's important to do the plan. Obviously, you do it for a reason. So the intention is to follow the plan. But if circumstances change, whether they're external circumstances or internal circumstances, that's the time to reevaluate the plan and make changes as necessary. And sometimes they're not always adverse either. Sometimes some huge opportunity opens up that you didn't recognize when you were doing your plan. And it's a big enough opportunity that it's worth making some changes and reprioritizing some things to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. Sometimes it's a staffing change that allows you to be like, maybe this is an opportunity to rethink the way I've got this team built. Maybe I need a little bit more of this skill and a little bit less of that skill. So agility, to me, it's, really interesting because this just came up in just a random social conversation recently where I was talking about kind of what I think the most important skill set is. And I actually think it's agility.
Yeah.
I think the ability to switch gears, to reevaluate, to be able to, not get stuck in like analysis paralysis, but to keep things moving forward is one of the big differentiating factors between those people who are really successful entrepreneurs and those who have a little bit more trouble getting the momentum that they want to get.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and you're, saying that there's a balance of discipline. I like that as well, because I think sometimes people are afraid to plan. And I know I had mindset issues around being able to execute the plan and, that sort of what if this, what if that, what if this, instead of, like you said, having that little bit of faith of, we have a good plan here. We've identified the variables. This is mitigating risk for us. We should move forward on this. But we're going to keep moving with it until or unless, the sun explodes or something major changes.
Yeah.
And then we're going to change it if necessary. So I think that's an excellent balance that you have the discipline going in to execute on the plan. I think this also is a conversation about being grounded and what I would call the reality of the plan. So even though, like you said, opportunities come up all the time, they're unexpected, they're amazing. I think if you would be forced to be disciplined to implement the plan, you'd also be forced to be very honest with the parts of the plan. I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that that's really important. And the other thing is that part of what the plan helps do is to help you differentiate between sort of the shiny objects and the things that are truly consistent with your plan. So evaluating those opportunities in the context of that big picture vision and where you're trying to go is really important, because one of the things that I've found in an entrepreneurial business is that there are these things that kind of pop up that are a great idea, probably really profitable. And, and somebody on my team will be like, well, let's do this. And yeah, that's a great idea. And yeah, it can be profitable, but that is not our core value proposition. That's not what we do best. Let somebody else do that. Let's focus on what we do really best. Because just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a good idea for you. And so I do think it helps with the filtering of that. So yes, stick with the plan, evaluate the opportunities, but do it in the context of that framework that you've put together for yourself. Because if the opportunity is just sort of ancillary to the core path that you're on of where you're trying to get to strategically, then it's really more of a distraction than it is an opportunity, even if it's going to make you money.
I love that. So yeah, you're evaluating this. Again, all good ideas don't have to be yours to do, right?
Right.
Just like, all good ideas may not be good ideas for this time as well, right? So it may not be for you and it may not be the right time. I love that. That is such a good point, that we're, again, being realistic, having the discipline, being agile and flexible, but then also being really intentional with these things when they do pop up. I love that. So do you have any closing thoughts? I mean, I think this is great. I think everybody should be doing at least an annual plan. I am a quarterly planning person. I'm a project management background though. And if I didn't have a plan, I think I would, I'd have anxiety in a really horrible way. So let me ask you, I do have one more question. If somebody hasn't been planning or doesn't really know, they can look at this and understand that it's kind of important, but really, I think it is until maybe they see some results of actual planning and they're not winging anymore that maybe they would become more structured with it. So, I mean, can we give permission that you could do an annual plan and then maybe not do the quarterly for 2025, or maybe you set a goal to do it and, give yourself some space. I do know a lot of entrepreneurs who've been very successful without a plan. And it always makes me go, wow.
Well, and it doesn't have to be this written, tome that you put in your office. Also, the mental exercise is a helpful mental exercise. And it's the mental exercise that really positions you. But I do think that writing down some goals is really helpful. There's actually data that shows, and I don't know exactly what the statistics are, but that goals that are written down are much more likely to be achieved than goals that are just like in your head, because you're not fully committing to it. When you commit to it, but also when you sort of energetically put it out there in the universe, I mean, or anything, but it's much more likely to happen. And it might not. In fact, my experience is that it almost never shows up exactly the way you put it in your plan, but you've put it out there with the intention is the road that you're on, the path that you're trying to get to. So you still end up getting the result, even if it didn't happen. You don't have a crystal ball. It's not going to happen exactly the way you put it.
Yeah, great point. So where can people find you if we have travel industry people listening in, reach out to you? Because it sounds like that's who you really love to work with. Where can people connect with you and, reach out and talk to you?
So our website is www.giftedtravelnetwork.com, and you can learn about us there. And, so if you have an existing, travel agency business and you are interested in, looking at, we're a luxury host agency, so we're very focused on the luxury market. But one of the things that we really do better than anyone, because our background is that we're coaches and educators, is we help people who might be in other careers or have other types of businesses who want to build a travel business, learn how to build a travel business from the ground up. And it's a great program for that called our Travel MBA program.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so we're going to put that down inside the show notes. So if you've ever been interested in the travel business, make sure that you follow up and, visit the website and make a connection there. So you help people from the ground up as well as people who have existing businesses.
Yeah. And I also have just like sort of a little short article that goes through some of that strategic planning framework. And so I can send that to you as well for people so they don't, they can use it for notes.
Fantastic. Yeah. So again, we'll put that all down inside the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on here and again, giving us a really cool perspective about doing what some people dread, but actually this sounds like a lot of fun because you're standing in the shoes of your client and you're considering really what you need first, and you put the pieces in. And I love that. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. We'll talk to you all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to DawnKKennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.